In the last two videos, I have talked about how an infectious disease such as pneumonia can lead to symptoms of dementia, and how a combination of people's, doctors' prejudices about old people, combined with the necessity of what's required by hospitals, how they have to deal with insurance companies, can lead to something that could have been pretty disastrous. In the first video, they wanted me to take Dad home because they weren't sure the insurance company was going to pay for it, even though he was very, very ill. In the second video, I talked about how, because of his hallucinations, because he had pneumonia, was used to give him Zyprexa. And I'm going to tell you now about how Zyprexa started to be prescribed for older people. And this is a much more insidious story, frankly, because this really gets into the profit motive, kind of beyond human foibles and how people make assumptions. This gets into profit. I told this story to a woman who I had known for about 8 years. It was because of her and her son that I knew what Zyprexa was. I could almost say they saved Dad from taking this drug. Mary's son, John, was schizophrenic. He got it when he was 15 years old. He is the first schizophrenic person I've ever treated. And when I first met him, he was just turning 18. I had a lot of time with him. I had a lot of family sessions with him and his mother and father. So I knew his mother very, very well. After this had happened with my father, I was meeting with her for something concerning John, but I started to tell her the story. Driving up Capitol Boulevard, Dad seeing the Indian on the road and the hospital, which ended with them giving him Zyprexa. But as I was telling her the story, I got to the part where I went to the hospital to take him home, and she said, "Stop. Before you go any further, I'm going to tell you what drug they gave him." You see, Mary was a farm tech for Walmart. Very big, as you all know, very big box store. And she had begun to notice that a lot of older people were coming into the store with prescriptions for Zyprexa. Now, as the mother of a schizophrenic, she knew perfectly well what Zyprexa was and who it was for. This concerned her a lot. So the first thing she did was to go to the pharmacist in the store and said, "What's going on here?" And she kind of got a shrug, and he says, "Well, that's what the doctor says. That's what we'll do." She actually then risked her job, because what she would do when an older person would come in with this prescription, she would say, "Are you sure? Do you know what this drug is and what it's for?" Unfortunately, they just took it anyway. Nobody stopped to think, wait a minute, maybe we should ask this question. Now what you need to know is how pharmaceutical companies work. Pharmaceutical companies spend many, many times more money on marketing their drugs to doctors than they spend on research or development or safety procedures, anything else. You can see by this chart, and actually Eli Lilly, the makers of Zyprexa, are actually one of the better ones, but even they spend much, much more money on marketing. Pharmaceutical companies annually spend about $3 billion to market to consumers. You've seen these ads. They'll have the person dancing through the fields about how much better they feel, and then down below it'll tell you what all the side effects are. But they also spend, about $24 billion a year marketing to doctors. I've been a recipient of some of that. I have been wined and dined, and I mean, I'm not an MD, but I have been wined and dined and at fancy restaurants, or they'll come in and feed a doctor's entire staff lunch. What that does is it buys them the ability to then be able to talk to the doctor about a particular drug and how great it is and other and brand new ways to use it. Now, this doesn't have to be a bad thing. And in fact, doctors are very busy. They can't always read, every medical journal that comes out. This could be something fairly good. However, sometimes it's not. And Zyprexa was definitely one of those cases. What Eli Lilly did was, there are only so many schizophrenics in the world. It's a good drug for most of them, by the way. It's a good antipsychotic drug for people who need an antipsychotic drug. But what Eli Lilly did was to say, we need to market it to a whole new audience. There's a lot of old people. Now, you know that I wasn't there when they said that. I'm reading that in. But I know that that's what happened because the end results are that the drug reps who wine and dine and then educate the doctors began selling them on the idea of what a great medication this would be for people with dementia. Now, even if it was strictly kept to older people with dementia, probably not such a great idea. Remember when I told you that my psychiatrist friend Mike said that the way it works is to dull the brain? If an elderly person is starting to experience actual dementia, you don't want to speed that along by dulling their brains. And of course, as I've showed you already and will continue to show you, a lot of the elderly people who have been diagnosed with dementia don't really have dementia at all. They have, in my father's case, pneumonia that had symptoms, or they'll have a UTI that has symptoms. But Eli Lilly sent their marketing forces out to say, tell these doctors that Zyprexa would be really great for these old folks. This resulted, by the way, in a $8 billion payout that Eli Lilly had to pay to make up for this grossly negligent thing that they did. So it's called negligent. I would actually say it was a little too active to be negligent, but it was a bad thing to do. They had to pay a lot of money. So now Eli Lilly no longer markets to doctors to tell them to prescribe Zyprexa to the elderly. However, there are still doctors out there who had started doing it back then and still do it now. There are not very many of them anymore, but do be careful. And also understand the example that I've given you in these last few videos is just one medication that is improperly prescribed to elderly people based on the belief that what's going on with them must be dementia, when in fact, it very likely is something else. This is why you really need to be very careful about finding the right pharmacist or nurse who will sit down with you and go through all the medications, explain to you what they are, how they interact with each other, and what really is not at all appropriate for you or your loved ones